The box was wrapped in cream paper with a ribbon, so wide it looked like something you'd cut at a ceremony, not open at a dinner table. My mother slid it toward me across the good tablecloth, tapped the bow twice with one manicured finger, and said the word that still catches in my chest a year later. Your future, sweetheart. Everyone at that table was smiling at me the way you smile at a stray dog you finally decided to let in the house. Warm. Relieved. A little proud of their own generosity. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My sister Madison was radiant in the candlelight, 30 days into a job that paid more in a year than my apartment was worth. And not one person sitting there, not my mother, not my father, not the aunts murmuring approval, not the man by the fireplace with the golf tan and the watchful eyes knew that I owned a company worth $1.5 billion. They thought I sold paperbacks for a living. They thought I was 34 and running out of road. They had planned this dinner for weeks, rehearsed it in a group text I wasn't supposed to see, built an entire evening around the quiet tragedy of me, and they had no idea that 3 days earlier, I'd signed off on a $40 million acquisition from a laptop above my bookstore and then gone downstairs to help a 9-year-old find a book about volcanoes. I want to tell you that I opened that box and felt rage. That would make a cleaner story. What I actually felt, sitting there with my hands folded in my lap while my mother beamed at her own performance, was something closer to grief. Because I already knew what was inside before I touched the ribbon. I'd overheard enough in the kitchen to know it wasn't a gift. It was a rescue. And rescues, in my family, only ever come with a leash attached. By the end of that night, my sister, the one being celebrated, the one with the $600,000 title and the corner office with the river view, would be on the kitchen floor, crying into her hands. And it would have nothing to do with any number in my bank account. But that's the end. Let me start where it actually started, because the box wasn't the biggest secret sitting in that house that night. It wasn't even close. My name is Thea Owens. I'm 34 years old, and for 10 years, my entire family has believed I was somebody who needed saving. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they'd been. And so, in a way, was I, because the thing I learned that night wasn't really about money at all. It was about the difference between being someone and being seen. My mother had spent my whole life telling me to be somebody. What none of them understood, until that Christmas Eve forced the question onto the table between the pie and the coffee, was that I already was. I had been for a decade. They just never once thought to ask. Here's something nobody tells you about being wealthy in secret. It's not glamorous. It's logistics. 3 days before that dinner, on a normal Tuesday, I was on my knees in the children's section of Dogwood Lane books, shelving picture books and listening to Mrs. Kowalski describe her grandson's dinosaur phase in more anatomical detail than I strictly needed. My store sits on Main Street in Maple Falls, Ohio, in a brick building with drafty windows and a radiator that clanks like an old man clearing his throat before he says something he probably shouldn't. I've run it for 9 years. The whole town knows me as the quiet Owens girl who sells paperbacks and drives a Honda old enough to vote. I drive that Honda because I like it. Good luck explaining that at my mother's table. Here's the part the town can't see. At 4 that afternoon, I climbed the back stairs to my apartment above the store, opened my laptop, and approved the acquisition of a regional freight company for $40 million. One signature. Then I closed the laptop, went back downstairs, and helped that same 9-year-old find a book about volcanoes. That's my life. Has been for a decade. I founded Lark's Holdings when I was 24. We move product for half the retail chains in the Midwest, the software, the warehouses, the trucks, all the invisible machinery running underneath everything you order online and forget was ever a physical object somebody had to drive somewhere. Our last funding round valued the company at $1.5 billion. I own 60% of it. Outside a small circle of lawyers and bankers bound by confidentiality, exactly 2 people knew my name was attached to any of it. My chief operating officer, Dana Whitfield, who handles the public side, the interviews, the keynotes, the handshakes. And my grandmother, Pearl, who knew I did well and never once asked for a number, because Pearl has never in her life needed a number to know what something's worth. My parents believed I was one bad month away from asking them for rent money. There's a phrase financial researchers use for people like me now. I only learned it recently, actually, reading about it after all this happened. They call it a hidden millionaire. Someone who's crossed into real wealth but doesn't identify as wealthy, doesn't live like it, doesn't think of themselves that way. Apparently, it's more common than people assume. Something like 4 out of 5 people who cross into 7-figure net worth don't think of themselves as investors, as rich, as any of the words that are supposed to come attached to a number that big. I used to think my hiding was some unique personal pathology. Turns out it's practically a demographic. That Tuesday, while I still smelled like paperback glue and cardboard dust, my mother called. My mother's phone voice has exactly 2 settings, honey and scalpel, and she can switch between them mid-sentence without you ever hearing the gears change. Thea, sweetheart. Christmas Eve, our house, 6 o'clock. We're celebrating your sister. I asked what we were celebrating, and the pause she took before answering was pure theater, timed like she'd rehearsed it in a mirror. Madison's been named Chief Executive Officer of Brightline Home. $600,000 a year, Thea. A CEO in this family. She let the number breathe the way some people let wine breathe. Then the scalpel came out, smooth enough that I almost admired the technique. And there's something important we want to discuss with you, too. About your future. You're 34, honey. The bookstore was sweet for a while, but sweet doesn't pay for retirement, does it? I looked out at the snow starting over Main Street and told her I'd be there. Wear something nice, she said. Gerald Hartman may stop by. He's the chairman of Madison's board. Very important man. Please don't talk about books all night. Then her voice dropped into the register she genuinely believes is love, the one I'd heard my entire adult life and never once found an answer to. We just want you to be somebody, Thea. She hung up before I could respond, which didn't matter, because in 11 years I had never once found a sentence that landed. I stood there holding the phone. A woman who'd signed a $40 million deal that afternoon, being told to wear something nice so she wouldn't embarrass the family in front of an important man. I want to be honest with you about something, because this story only works if I am. I wasn't angry yet. Anger takes hope. And mine had scar tissue where the hope used to be. To show you where that scar came from, I have to take you back 11 years, to the last time my family sat me down to save me from myself. I was 23 when I watched my first company die. It was a small furniture delivery startup, 2 leased vans, a scheduling app I'd built at my kitchen table, and 14 months of 18-hour days. A national chain moved into our market, undercut every quote I could make, and I lost the vans, my savings, and most of my tolerance for the word entrepreneur. I came home that Thanksgiving hollowed out, looking for a couch, some stuffing, and maybe one person willing to say, "You tried something hard." Instead, I got a family meeting. My mother had arranged the living room like a tribunal, me on the low ottoman, everyone else above me on the good furniture, aunts and uncles included, because in my family, shame is a spectator sport with assigned seating. She'd made notes. She went through my failure line by line, the loan, the lease I'd broken, the boyfriend who'd left. My father studied his hands. My sister, 26 then and already a district manager, said nothing at all. My mother leaned forward, took both my hands like she was doing me a kindness, and said, "Dreams are for people who can afford them, sweetheart." Everyone nodded. My uncle said, "Amen." I spent that night washing dishes so nobody would see my face. And somewhere between the roasting pan and the pie plates, something in me went very quiet and very cold. They would never see me try again. If my dreams were a luxury item, fine, I'd build them somewhere my family couldn't window shop. Here's what nobody tells you about secrecy. It starts as a bandage and hardens into armor. And one day you realize you've built a fortress and moved in. I want to pause here and tell you something I only learned much later, because I think it matters. I used to believe what I'd done, going quiet, disappearing into my own success, letting my family believe the worst version of me, was some private failure of nerve. Turns out it's closer to a national pattern than a personal one. Something like 4 in 10 American adults are currently estranged from a family member. Most of the time, when it's a parent-child estrangement, It's the adult child who cut the thread, not the parent. I could have been one of those numbers. Some nights, sitting on my kitchen floor after a hard call with Dana, I came close. I didn't cut the thread. I just went underground instead. I'm still not sure, honestly, which one costs more. I built Larks the way you learn a language by being dropped somewhere and slightly drowning. Night shifts at a distribution warehouse outside Columbus. Routing software written in the break room that cut our dead miles by a fifth. I kept it instead of selling it, quit, started Larks with one client and a laptop. We bought a struggling warehouse operator in year 3, 2 trucking firms in year 5. By year 7, the trade papers were writing about the company's mysterious ownership because I'd structured everything through layered holding companies out of Delaware and let Dana be the face of it. One reporter nicknamed the majority owner the Ghost. I liked being the Ghost. The Ghost never has to sit on an ottoman. The first thing I ever bought with real money was the brick building on Main Street. I put a bookstore in it because a bookstore is the one business nobody in my family would ever envy enough to ask questions about. 2 days before that Christmas dinner at 9:40 at night, my phone lit up with a group text. My mother had named it Christmas Eve Plan, and I can only assume she'd built it in a hurry because there was one member she'd forgotten to remove. Me. The messages came in a cheerful little burst. The menu. The seating chart, which put me between my mother and my sister's husband. You seat a flight risk between 2 guards, though I didn't clock that yet. Then, from my mother, verbatim, heart emoji included, Frank will read the letter after dessert. Madison presents the offer. Don't bring up the assistant job until after the toast. Let her have a nice dinner first. And 30 seconds later, the message I've now read more times than I'll ever admit to anyone. Nobody tells Thea it's an intervention. She'll run. I sat on the edge of my bed and watched 3 little typing dots appear and disappear. Madison had seen it. Her husband had seen it. My father was presumably in the room while it was typed. Not one of them wrote back, "Wait, she's in this group." Not one of them wrote, "Maybe we shouldn't ambush her at Christmas." The dots just stopped. And I understood, finally and completely, that the dinner was scripted, a letter, an offer, a toast first, so the ambush would land on a full stomach. I put the phone face down on the quilt and stared at the ceiling for a long time. And here's the part I'm not proud of. Somewhere under the hurt, cold, and patient as a ledger, an idea sat up. That night brought no tears and no shouting, because by then I'd had 11 years of practice at neither. What I did instead was make a decision I'd spend the next 2 days telling myself was research. They believed I was broke, naive, and running out of chances. Fine. I would walk into that dinner as exactly the woman they'd invented, thrift store coat, the Honda, wide eyes, no defenses, and I would finally watch, closely and clearly, how my family treats someone they believe has nothing to offer them. Every condescending smile would be a data point. Every seating chart and scripted toast would go in the file. And when the night was over, I'd tally it up like a year-end audit and decide, once and for all, how much of my life these people had actually earned. You can call that a test. My grandmother would later call it something sharper, and she'd be right. But I'm telling this in order. I told Dana to hold anything urgent unless it truly couldn't wait. I decided I'd drive myself and park facing the street. An exit plan, the kind you make for a building you expect to catch fire. The morning of the 23rd, my grandmother Pearl called the store. She's 86. She still drives her ancient Buick to bingo, and she does not make phone calls to chat. "You're coming tomorrow night?" she asked. I said yes. There was a pause with weight in it. "Good," she said. "I need you there, Thea." And she hung up before I could ask why. My grandmother has never once needed me at a dinner. That afternoon, Dana sent me a file marked urgent, and I want you to appreciate the timing because I've had a year to appreciate it and I'm still not done. It was a client review, Brightline Home, a regional home goods retailer, one of Lark's 10 biggest accounts. We ran their entire fulfillment operation, every warehouse, every truck. And they were bleeding on us. Invoices sliding past 90 days. 2 quarters of missed volume commitments. Our analysts recommended terminating the contract at the end of January, which for a retailer coming off the holidays isn't a haircut. It's a heart attack. I read the summary twice, and then I reached the paragraph naming the brand new CEO hired 3 weeks earlier to right the ship. Madison Owens Clark. I sat back and looked at that sentence for a long time. My sister's $600,000 triumph, the crown jewel of tomorrow's dinner, was the top job at a company my own analysts had just described, in writing, as circling the drain. She didn't know I existed anywhere near her world. She didn't know her biggest vendor was quietly deciding her company's future from a bookstore in Maple Falls. I typed one instruction to Dana: hold the termination decision until after the holidays. No explanation. She didn't ask for one. That's why it's Dana. I told myself it was diligence, not mercy. My parents' house on Christmas Eve looked like a catalog had detonated, garland on every banister, a 9-foot tree, a hired kid in a black apron taking coats, which told me my mother had an audience in mind before she'd invited a single guest. She met me at the door, kissed the air near my cheek, and did the full elevator scan: coat, boots, bare nails. "Oh, Thea," she sighed, in the voice other people reserve for flat tires. "You could have made an effort." "Well, come in before the neighbors see." The dining table was set for 14, each place marked with a cream card in calligraphy, and under most names a title. Madison Owens Clark, Chief Executive Officer. Cole Clark, Regional Sales Director. My cousin said registered nurse. My father said Frank Owens, head of the family, which would have been funny if any part of it were true. Mine said Thea. Just Thea, floating there in all that white cardstock like the printer had run out of ideas. I was still looking at it when I felt someone watching me. By the fireplace stood a man I'd never met at a single family event: silver hair, golf tan, the practiced lean of a man who chairs things. My mother materialized at my elbow, glowing. "That's Gerald Hartman, chairman of Madison's board. He squeezed us in on Christmas Eve. Isn't that marvelous?" It was marvelous. It was also, though my mother couldn't have known it, the single most dangerous thing she'd done to me all night, because Gerald Hartman was looking at me the way you look at a word sitting right on the tip of your tongue. And I had seen him before, across a lawyer's conference table in Chicago. I had come to play the naive broke girl, and my family made it effortless, because no one checks a costume they design themselves. During cocktail hour, I asked Cole what quarterly numbers meant and watched him grow 2 inches taller explaining it. I let my mother explain the word portfolio to me slowly, with hand gestures, while her friends exchanged glances soft with pity. My aunt asked if I was still doing the little book thing, and when I said yes, squeezed my arm twice, the way you comfort someone recently diagnosed. I mentioned I'd been thinking about picking up extra shifts somewhere, and watched the sentence travel the room like a canopy. Everyone took a piece. Nobody asked a follow-up question. Not what I loved about the store. Not whether I was happy. Not one single question about my actual life. That was the first data point that genuinely stung, and I want to be honest about that. I'd walked in braced for cruelty. What I got was worse. I got dismissal, warm and total, the kind you can't argue with because it's smiling at you while it erases you. Only Hartman kept drifting back into my line of sight, swirling his scotch, studying me in polite little sips. Then my mother clinked a glass with her ring, and the room hushed like a theater. "We have a little family tradition," she announced. "We have no such tradition." But that night, apparently, we did. She stood at the head of the table with a piece of paper she pretended not to need and delivered what she called a review of our family's year, a shareholder report where the only stock was Madison. She walked us through the promotion like Stations of the Cross, and when she reached the number, she gave every syllable its own spotlight. $600,000 a year. The room applauded. Cole whistled. My uncle said, "Now that's a return on investment," and clapped my father on the shoulder, and my father beamed the borrowed beam of a man applauding someone else's weather. Madison stood in the wash of it, lovely and lacquered, and I clapped too, honestly, because whatever else is true, my sister works like a rented mule and always has. Then my mother turned to me, and the room's temperature moved with her eyes. "And Thea," she said, consulting her paper as if my life required footnotes, "is still with her little bookstore." A beat timed perfectly. We keep hoping. The laughter was quiet and terrible, the kind people offer when they're grateful the spotlight found someone else. I smiled and raised my eggnog to her. One broke girl saluting the fleet. Inside, the ledger got a fresh line. But here's what I noticed while the room chuckled at me, and it's the detail that kept me from enjoying my own experiment. Gerald Hartman wasn't laughing. He was looking from Madison to me and back with the stalled expression of a man doing arithmetic that wouldn't come out even. The doorbell rang mid-applause, and my grandmother blew in with a cold, 86 years old, 5 feet of wool coat and opinions. She hugged Madison, said congratulations like she meant it, then found me and held on an extra beat. "Stay close tonight," she said, quiet enough that I nearly missed it. Before I could ask why, she was already moving toward the seat my mother had placed for her, past the cousins, at the far end, the seat you give a child or a problem. "Money is loud," Pearl said to the table, unfolding her napkin with the crisp snap of a woman who's buried a husband and 2 business partners. "Worth is quiet." The table did the polite chuckle it does when it can't tell if it's been blessed or slapped. Before we sat, Hartman cornered me by the drinks cart with the gentle inevitability of a man who's run 1,000 meetings. Small talk about supply chains, watching my face the whole time. Then, with the ease of long practice, Larkspur runs bright lines entire backbone. You'd never guess who owns it. Trade press calls the owner a ghost. A pause. "Funny thing, you remind me of someone I saw in a room in Chicago once." Never said a word. The whole room just waited on her nod. I stood there 30 seconds from having 10 years of careful architecture pulled down at my mother's drinks cart, and did the hardest, easiest thing in the world. I giggled. "Me? I sell picture books to 3rd graders. But I'll tell my customers a ghost story about billionaires. They'll love it." His face did something complicated. My mother swept him off to see the tree, and I breathed. Then they sent me to the kitchen for the mashed potatoes. Every ambush needs its errands. That's when I saw it, under the tree, set apart the way a reliquary sits apart from luggage, a box wrapped in cream paper, wide red ribbon. The tag in my mother's careful hand, "To Thea, your future. Love, Mom and Dad." Through the kitchen doorway, I heard my mother and Madison, voices low and efficient, running the schedule like producers before a broadcast. "After dessert, your father reads the letter. Then Madison, you present the offer. Warm big sister, not boss." Then my mother's voice dropped into a register I recognized from 11 years ago, the Tribunal Register. Calm. Certain. Utterly without malice, which is what makes it unsurvivable. Don't let her answer until everyone's watching. She won't make a scene in front of guests. She never does. And Madison, my sister, the celebrated executive, the woman I'd just applauded, said, "I know. That's what I'm counting on." I carried the potatoes to the table and set them down without spilling a drop. If you'd looked at me, you'd have seen a drab woman in an old sweater doing an errand. You would not have seen what I was actually doing, which was standing very still inside myself, watching the last soft thing I felt for that dinner party quietly close its doors. Humiliating me hadn't been an impulse. They'd rehearsed it. The box sat under the tree through the whole meal, patient as a verdict. Dinner was long and glittering, and I remember almost none of it because all of it was preamble. When the pie plates were cleared, my mother touched my father's sleeve, and Frank Owens rose with a folded sheet of paper and the expression of a man sent to do weather in a war zone. "Thea," he read, and his voice shook, because whatever else my father is, he isn't a natural executioner. "You're 34 years old. We love you, and it breaks our hearts watching you waste yourself." The letter went on. My mother's sentences in my father's mouth. The bookstore called your hiding place. My Honda made an appearance. So did my empty ring finger, to a sympathetic murmur from the ants. I sat with my hands folded and took it. Data point after data point, while around the table every face arranged itself into troubled compassion, which, From the inside, looks exactly like an audience. Then my mother stood, because the headliner never lets the opening act close. Sweetheart, we didn't want another year of this, so we did something about it. Chin high. A woman being brave on my behalf. We just want you to be somebody. There it was. The family motto, laid on me like a wreath. Madison went to the tree and came back with the box, set it in front of me. Inside, on bright line letterhead, lay an employment agreement. Executive assistant to the chief executive officer. Salary, $52,000. Start date, January 2nd. Reporting directly to Madison Owens Clark. My sister leaned down beside me, warm as a heat lamp, and said the sentence she'd rehearsed in the kitchen. You don't have to be great, Thea. You just have to be near it. I was still looking at the tidy signature line, my name printed underneath it, at a salary my own company moved every 4 seconds of a business day, when my mother, flushed with momentum, decided the night could hold one more announcement. And since we're all together, there's a family decision about Grandma Pearl. I watched my grandmother's chin come up slowly at the far end of the table. We've spoken with a realtor friend of mine. In January, we're listing the Chestnut Street house. Mother Pearl will move to Silver Meadows. They have a waiting list, but I pulled strings. She said pulled strings the way other people say performed surgery. The house money will set her up beautifully. And honestly, that old place needs a family, not a widow rattling around in it. She turned to me, smiling, folding me in without a gram of cruelty in her voice, which is the thing about my mother I've never been able to explain to anyone. Honey, you couldn't buy the garage. The table chuckled. Cole toasted new chapters. And I looked down the long white tablecloth at the one person who'd ever kept my secret without asking to see the vault, sitting in the far chair, being liquidated by committee between the pie and the coffee. I understood, finally and completely, why Pearl had needed me there. My mother produced a pen, not offered it, produced it, and laid it across the contract at the perfect angle, a stage manager's touch. Sign it tonight, sweetheart. Start the new year new. Cole talked about growth mindset. My aunt said opportunities like this don't knock twice, not at my age. My uncle observed to no one and everyone that some people need the nest kicked or they never fly. And the table murmured its amen, the same amen from 11 years ago, aged like a bad wine. Madison crouched beside my chair, actually crouched, the posture you take with toddlers and skittish dogs, and made her closing argument, eyes shining, and I believe to this day she meant every word as kindness, which is the horror of it. I know it feels small, but I'll be right there. I can teach you everything. I thought about the room in Chicago, where nobody talks until the quiet woman by the window nods. And then, for the third time that evening, Gerald Hartman's phone went off in his jacket. And this time, when he read the screen, the chairman of Brightline's board went the color of the tablecloth. I asked for a moment to think, the condemned always gets a cigarette, and stepped onto the back porch to call Dana, who answered on the first ring, which meant it was bad. Brightline's board is in an emergency session, she said. Somebody over there got wind. They're preparing to terminate. Damage control, but with other people's money. They're accelerating the new CEO's commitment package. They want it signed December 26th, before the news about us leaks. I knew what a commitment package meant at a company like that. I asked anyway, because I needed to hear it out loud. Equity buy-in. Your sister personally purchases $340,000 in stock. Standard skin in the game. Except the game's already over. That money's a sandbag against a flood. It buys them maybe a quarter. Through the kitchen window I could see Madison laughing, head tipped back, the Riverview executive at the top of her year, about to pour her savings into a hole her own board already knew was cracked. If we terminate, they fold by spring, Dana said, level as always. If we stay quiet, your sister buys the iceberg. What do you want to do? Snow started, small and dry. Nothing yet, I told her. Keep your phone on. Then I went back inside, where it turned out the night wasn't done cornering me. Hartman intercepted me in the hallway, one hand light on my elbow, all charm with nothing behind the eyes but calculation. Borrow you for 1 minute. Frank study. A chairman doesn't ask. He schedules. He shut the door with a click that rearranged the evening, and the charm came off like a coat. Chicago. 2 years ago. Wexler and Roth. A financing meeting. For attorneys, 2 bankers, your COO Whitfield, and a woman who came in late, sat in the third chair from the window, never said a word. When the terms changed at the 11th hour, every person in that room stopped talking and waited on her. He stepped closer. I've spent 2 years wondering who that woman was. Tonight I walk into a Christmas party in Maple Falls, and she's being lectured about a bookstore. He spread his hands, laying down a card he clearly wished were smaller. So, before I say anything to anyone, tell me I'm wrong. I want to be honest about that moment, because it's the hinge the rest of my life turned on. I could have lied. I had 10 years of practice, a face built for it, and a cover story so boring it defended itself. A laugh, a shrug, you got me. I snuck into a skyscraper, and Gerald Hartman would have doubted his own memory by midnight, because rich men would always rather doubt a memory than believe a woman in an old sweater outranks them. The fortress would have held. Nobody would ever have known. I stood in my father's study, in the house where I first learned to hide, and heard my grandmother's voice from an hour earlier. Stay close tonight. And I was so tired. Tired in my teeth. Tired of being a ghost at every table I built and every table I was born to. So I told him. Third chair from the window. 2 beats of silence. Then Gerald Hartman aged and lightened at the same time. A man watching a lottery ticket and a subpoena arrive in the same envelope. My God, you're the ghost. What he did next told me everything about him and about the world my mother worships, because he didn't apologize for the evening he'd just watched them put me through. He negotiated. Voice down, hands open. Extend the contract. Give bright line air through the second quarter, and there's no reason anyone needs to hear about tonight's unpleasantness. No reason to trouble anyone with the details of the commitment package either. The buy-in shores up the bridge, and your sister gets to keep her big job. Everybody wins. My secret, my sister's savings, and his sinking ship, all tied with one ribbon. Enjoy dinner, Gerald, I said, and walked out and left my old life behind in that study. I didn't go back to the table. I went out the back door, no coat, and found the porch already occupied, Pearl on the old glider, mittened hands around a mug of tea gone cold. They got to the house yet? Or just the part where they save you from yourself? I told her both. She nodded, unsurprised. You know what your problem is, Thea Jean? Not a question. Same as your mother's, turned inside out. She needs the whole world to see her worth. You need to make sure nobody ever does. She looked at me, 86 years of her, eyes like water under ice. You've been running a test on this family for 10 years, child. Nobody passes a test they don't know they're taking. I opened my mouth to defend myself and found the cupboard bare. Money is loud, she said, softer now. Worth is quiet. But quiet and hidden aren't the same thing. And you've been calling one the other for a long time. When I came back inside, Hartman had performed triage on his own panic, fresh drink, chairman's smile, and as I entered he raised his glass. A little bird tells me Brightline has very exciting news coming with our partner Larkspur in the new year. Looking right at me. A message. A leash. My mother, who wouldn't know Larkspur from a garden center, but knows the word partner in a rich man's mouth, lit up. Which makes tonight perfect. Thea, the pen still warm. The contract had migrated to the piano lid. The whole table was watching again, plus one chairman with a very personal interest in whether the ghost of Larks was about to become his CEO's errand girl. We just want you to be somebody, my mother said, for the 3rd time that day, holding out the pen. I looked at it. And then I asked if I could say something first. Madison, misreading my face for stage fright, laughed her hostess laugh and steered me into the kitchen by the wrist, sister style, the way she used to pull me out of church. The door swung shut on the party, and for the first time in maybe 15 years, I saw the actual Madison, the one under the lacquer, sagging against the counter like a puppet with the hand withdrawn. Please just sign it, she said, voice thin as wire. I know it's beneath you. I know mom's being mom. But if you're settled, she'll finally stand down. You have no idea what it's like being the one she stopped. The sentence finished itself in my head. Being the one she aims at the sky instead of the ground. 3 weeks into the job, she told me, and the numbers were fog. Reports kept getting management adjusted. Finance kept rescheduling her briefings. And now this buy-in, her savings, her whole 401k, which didn't even know all of it yet. Gerald says it's standard. He's been doing this 30 years. She looked up at me, drowning, having no idea help. She looked up at me, my big sister drowning in front of me in a kitchen that smelled like pie, having no idea help was standing right in front of her wearing an old coat. And what she asked for broke something in me cleanly, because she didn't ask for help. She asked, "Just take the job, Thea. So mom relaxes. So one of us gets to breathe." That's when I finally understood the family arithmetic. They hadn't built a ladder for her and a cage for me. They'd built 2 cages and gold-plated one. I stood in my mother's kitchen holding my sister's secret, and my options laid themselves out side by side, tidy as year-end statements, because that's how my mind works even when my chest hurts. Option 1. Stay hidden. Walk out, drive home, let the Lark's termination proceed in January the way the analysts wanted. Cut this family off clean and keep the answer my test had already delivered. They treat a woman they think is poor like a burden to be managed. End of report. The fortress survives. Madison signs on the 26th and loses everything. And technically, none of it would be my doing. Option 2. Spend it. Spend the secret I'd guarded for 10 years, the ghost that kept me safe. The last clean answer I'd ever get to the question of whether my family could love me small. Spend all of it, here, tonight, in front of the aunts and the Amen chorus and the chairman, to save the sister who'd just asked me to be her assistant. Pearl's voice sat in the middle of the ledger like a paperweight. Nobody passes a test they don't know they're taking. For 10 years, the safest room in my life had been the one where nobody knew me. Standing in that kitchen, I finally did the math on what the rent had actually cost. I took my sister's hand off my wrist, gently, the way you take a glass from someone before you tell them bad news. Then I walked back through the swinging door, past the piano, to the head of the table. And I did not pick up the pen. Madison. One question before anybody signs anything in this family tonight. The room went curious and quiet. My sister came through the door behind me, puzzled. Has anyone shown you Brightline's aging report? The real one. Not the management version. Across the room, Gerald Hartman set his glass down so fast it cracked against the piano lid. "Thea," my mother hissed. "Sit down." But I stayed on my feet and kept my voice at exactly the pitch I use for story time, because nothing unsettles loud people like calm. "Receivables running past 90 days, I said, to Madison, only to Madison. 2 straight quarters of missed volume commitments to your biggest logistics vendor. Warehouse inventory stacked 2 seasons deep because sell-through collapsed in the fall. A credit line that's fully drawn. Which is why, 3 weeks after hiring you, your board suddenly needs its brand new CEO to write a personal check for $340,000 and call it confidence." The words landed like dropped silverware. Cole snorted. "Where's this coming from, Facebook?" My aunt murmured something about jealousy, satisfied, like a diagnosis had been confirmed. My mother stood, wringing her napkin. "Thea Owens, your sister runs a company. You sell paperbacks. Apologize." I didn't move, because I was watching the only person in the room whose opinion of my information actually mattered, and Gerald Hartman had gone the gray of wet newspaper. Madison looked from him to me and back, and I watched 3 weeks of fog condense into one droplet of ice-cold understanding. "The aging report," she said slowly, to Hartman, not to me. "I asked finance for receivables detail twice, Gerald. I got summaries." Her voice didn't rise. It lowered, and for one strange, proud second, she sounded exactly like Pearl. "Why does my sister know my numbers?" And there it was. The question arrived at last, standing in the middle of my mother's Christmas like a stranger nobody had invited. Every face at that table turned to me. I took one breath, 10 years long. Because Lark's is mine, I said. I founded it 10 years ago. I own 60% of it. My company runs every warehouse and every truck Brightline has. And my analysts have spent 3 weeks deciding whether to cut your company loose, Madison. That's why I know your numbers. They cross my desk before they cross yours. Silence has a sound. It's the ice shifting in 14 abandoned glasses. My mother laughed. I want you to understand, she genuinely laughed, a bright social peel, looking around the table to invite everyone to join her, because the sentence I'd just said couldn't be parked anywhere in the universe she lived in. Thea, sweetheart, Lark's that's $1 billion company. Gerald, tell her. She turned to him, still smiling, holding out the moment like a plate that needed taking. Gerald Hartman looked at me. One long look, the study, Chicago, the whole arithmetic finally balancing, and said the only word he had left. Chicago. Then he sat down carefully, like a man minding a bad back, and set his drink on the floor beside his chair. My mother's smile stayed up a full 3 seconds after everything behind it had gone. I watched it happen. And I want to be honest with you, the way I promised at the start, watching it, I felt no triumph at all. I felt the floor of 10 years drop out because her face went from scorn to shock to something worse. I watched my own mother begin to reappraise me in real time, the way a realtor's eyes reappraise a house when the neighborhood suddenly comes up. And I understood, with perfect clarity, the price of the thing I'd just spent. I would never again know which version of her love was for me and which was for the number. That answer had been the whole point of my test. And it burned down with the fortress, all in one sentence. My father whispered my name like a fact he was checking. I turned to my mother and finished it quietly. You told me dreams are for people who can afford them. I could afford mine, Mom. You just never asked. My mother recovered the way weather recovers, total, immediate, shameless. 10 seconds of dead air, and then the tears arrived, right on schedule, and she came around the table with both arms rising like a drawbridge in reverse. My daughter. My brilliant, secretive girl. I always knew. I always said you had something, didn't I, Frank? I stepped back. One step, small and complete, and it stopped her mid-reach. No, I said, and there was no anger in it, which is, I think, why it worked. You don't get to be proud of me tonight. An hour ago, I was your failure. You wrapped my rescue in ribbon and rehearsed my ambush in the kitchen. The only thing that's changed since then is a number. Her mouth opened. I said the rest before it could deploy. I was always somebody, Mom. You were waiting for a number. My aunt studied the tablecloth. Cole put down his phone. I picked up the contract, my future in its cream and ribbon coffin, folded it neatly along its original crease, and set it beside my plate, square to the table edge, the way you return something borrowed. The answer is no. To this job and to the other offer I got tonight. I glanced at Hartman, still parked in his chair. The one where I stay quiet and everybody wins. My mother turned to my father, opening the channel she'd used for 40 years, the one where Frank clears his throat and restores order. And my father stood, looked at his wife, and for the first time in my witnessed life, went off script. Sandra. Sit down. Quiet. Not unkind. Absolutely unprecedented. Sit down and let the girl talk. I read that letter tonight because you told me she needed saving. Seems to me we ought to hear what she thinks needs saving in this room. My mother sat. The house itself seemed to lean in. I turned to face the chairman. Gerald. Here's what happens now, and you can decide it in front of the witnesses you performed for all evening. I kept my voice boardroom plain, no flourish, because the numbers were flourish enough. Lark's will extend Brightline's payment terms 90 days and keep the contract through the first quarter. 2 conditions. 1. The equity buy-in on your new CEO disappears tonight. She doesn't wire $1. 2. An independent audit, a firm of my choosing, full access, books open to Madison by January 15th. She runs a real company with real numbers. Or you can explain to your board why your largest vendor sent a termination letter on December 26th, and why you sat at this table all night watching your board's problems get solved with her retirement account. I let it sit. You have until the coffee's cold. Nobody breathed. Hartman looked around the table, at the aunts, at my father still standing where the toast used to be, a chairman discovering that Christmas dinner had quietly become the most consequential board meeting of his year, and he was outvoted 1-1. And the one held all the leverage. He picked his drink up off the floor, set it on the table. Agreed. Just that. Gray and small. And my sister, $600,000 a year, corner office, Riverview, made a sound I hadn't heard from her since we were kids. Half hiccup, half sob. She walked out of the dining room into the kitchen, where her legs simply quit, and she slid down the cabinets to the floor and sat there on the tile, crying into her hands, in her beautiful suit. I told you at the beginning, by the end of that night, my sister was on the kitchen floor crying, and it had nothing to do with anything I own. She was crying because somebody had finally stood between her and the people spending her. It had just never occurred to her that it would be me. I sat with Madison on the kitchen floor for a while. Some things you do in a suit. Some things you do in an old sweater. Turns out this one works in both. When her breathing evened out, I got my coat from the hired kid and walked out the front door into the snow. My mother followed me, of course. But when she reached the driveway, she didn't perform. She just stood there in the porch light with her arms crossed against the cold, and when she finally spoke, the honey and the scalpel were both gone, and underneath them was an old woman from the wrong side of a butcher counter. My father told me a butcher's girl shouldn't dream past the register, she said. I spent 30 years selling houses to women who never once remembered my name. The snow ticked down between us. I thought if you girls had titles, the world couldn't do to you what it did to me. That's what I thought love was. Armor. It is the only true, near apology I have ever heard from her. Standing there, I felt its weight and its limit at the same time. That's the first true thing you've said to me in 11 years, I said. Say it again sometime. Some night when you haven't just been caught. I got in the Honda and backed out. In the mirror, she got smaller under the porch light, still standing there when I turned the corner. Here's what a year did. The audit took 11 weeks and read like a weather report from inside a hurricane, 3 years of numbers wearing makeup. Gerald Hartman resigned as chairman in February to pursue other commitments, which is board language for before the vote. Bright line shrank by nearly half. What was left was smaller and honest and paid its invoices in 30 days. I know, because I still see them. Line 9 of a report I read every month. Madison stayed. The remaining board offered her the real job, at real terms, and she took it at a lower salary and told me it was the first offer in her life she was certain she'd earned. Her $340,000 never left her account. The Chestnut Street house never got listed. I bought it in the spring market price, real closing paperwork, straight as a pew, because Pearl Owens does not accept charity, and I wasn't fool enough to offer any. She lives there still, and pays me rent of $1 a month. Terms she dictated. I just initialed. As for the ghost, the trade press got the story by March, the way they always do. My town buzzed for 2 weeks, and then Maple Falls did the wonderful thing small towns do, which is decide your news is old. The bookstore is still open Tuesday through Sunday. Mrs. Kowalski's grandson has moved on from dinosaurs to sharks. And my mother and I began the slow, unglamorous work of finding out what we are to each other when nobody's performing. I want to be honest about how that's gone, because a year isn't a movie. It hasn't been clean. Some nights I still catch myself bracing at the sound of her voice on the phone, waiting for the scalpel setting. Most nights, lately, it doesn't come. That's not nothing. It's also not everything. This Christmas Eve, there were 6 of us at a table set for exactly 6. My parents, Pearl, Madison, Cole, and me. No hired kid at the door. No place cards. No titles under anybody's name. No toast reviewing the family's year, because we'd all lived it and didn't need the shareholder version. My mother is still my mother. She started telling the neighbors in November that her daughter was in logistics, actually quite significant, caught my eye across the yard, and stopped herself. That clumsy little correction, repeated a dozen ways over a dozen months, is what change actually looks like at 63. It isn't a movie apology. It's a woman catching her own voice in the air and putting it down. Under the tree, there was one box for me. Small. Wrapped in plain paper. Inside was a beat-up copy of A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, the same edition I'd checked out of the library over and over the year I was 12, the year she used to say reading wouldn't pay for anything. On the flyleaf, she'd written, "You were right about what things cost. Love, Mom." Pearl caught my eye down the table and winked, slow as a lighthouse. Money is loud, she'd told this family once. And worth is quiet. This year, for the first time in my memory, my family finally lowered its voice. And I stopped hiding inside the hush. If the people you love only see you when you shine, the bravest thing you can do isn't hiding your light, and it isn't blinding them with it. It's standing in plain sight at your full size and letting them choose what to do with the view.